The first time Riven Hale saw Titan, 3 security guards were backing away from him, while a veterinarian locked himself inside a service truck. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was moving. Just the sound of gravel crunching under heavy paws. And one enormous Rottweiler standing in the center of the estate courtyard like he owned every inch of it. Riven had barely stepped through the service gate when a hand grabbed his arm. "Don't!" A tall man in a pressed gray uniform, name tag reading DeMarco, pulled him sideways. His face was calm, but his eyes weren't. "Stay behind the hedges. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak." Riven looked toward the dog. Titan was well over 130 pounds. Black and rust-colored. Built low and wide, all chest and jaw. He stood perfectly still, watching the men who'd cornered themselves against the service truck. One of the guards had his radio halfway to his mouth and wasn't moving it. "How long has this been going on?" Riven asked. 20 minutes. DeMarco let out a slow breath. Vet was supposed to run a routine check. Titan got loose from the East Wing kennel. 3rd time this month. "Has he hurt anyone?" DeMarco looked at him sideways. "Does that matter?" Riven didn't answer. Hi viewers. Have you ever walked into a situation where everyone else was running away, and something inside you just told you to stay? Because that's exactly where Riven was standing right now. New to the estate. First day on the job. Not even fully processed through the house manager's orientation yet. And already standing 30 feet from a dog that had reportedly put 2 trained handlers in the emergency room. Most people would have stepped back. Riven didn't step back. He watched Titan the way you watch something you're trying to understand. Not with fear, not with aggression, just with attention. His eyes tracked the dog's posture. The way the shoulders were pulled up tight. The rapid, shallow chest movement. The fact that Titan wasn't charging. Wasn't barking. Wasn't even growling anymore. He was frozen. And frozen wasn't dangerous. Frozen was something else entirely. The chain link on the left side of the courtyard rattled hard. Someone must have moved too fast near the kennel door. Titan spun toward the sound. Every guard flinched backward. The vet pressed himself flat against the truck window. Then the chain link swung open, and Titan ran. Not toward the guards. Not toward the truck. Directly toward Riven. 200 pounds of instinct said run. Riven didn't run. His right knee hit the stone ground first. Then his left. He lowered himself slowly, deliberately, until he was kneeling in the center of the courtyard with his hands open at his sides. Palms up, eyes dropped just below Titan's eye line. He didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He just waited. DeMarco made a sound that wasn't quite a word. One of the guards grabbed a radio. Someone from the East Wing ran toward the courtyard door and then stopped when they saw what was happening. Titan slowed. 40 feet became 30. 30 became 20. The dog's massive chest was heaving. His paws dragging slightly on the stone like he was fighting his own momentum. His ears shifted, pressed flat 1 second, then slowly pulling upright. 15 feet. 10. Titan stopped. He stood there, breathing hard, staring down at the kneeling figure in the gray house uniform. This small, quiet man who hadn't moved, hadn't shouted, hadn't raised a hand. And then Titan made a sound that nobody on the estate had ever heard him make before. A low, broken exhale. Not a growl. Something else. Riven stayed still. Titan took 1 step forward. Then another. His head dropped as he moved, dropping below his own shoulder line, which was the opposite of aggression. He walked the remaining distance slowly. Stopped right in front of Riven. Then the enormous dog lowered his head and pressed it against Riven's chest. The courtyard went completely silent. Nobody said anything for a long moment. DeMarco's radio crackled and he didn't answer it. The vet had the truck door cracked open but wasn't getting out. 2 housekeeping staff stood frozen at the far entrance, hands pressed over their mouths. Riven raised one hand slowly and placed it on the back of Titan's neck. The dog let out a long, heavy breath. That was when Riven looked up and noticed the figure standing at the top of the stone steps. He hadn't been there before. Or maybe he had, and Riven had simply missed him in all the chaos. Either way, the man was there now, standing completely still at the top of the entrance stairs with his arms at his sides and his expression unreadable. Dark suit, silver-white hair, eyes that caught the afternoon light in a way that felt less like color and more like temperature. Cold, precise, watchful. Caius Dreven. The man owned every inch of this estate, every company connected to it, and reportedly a significant portion of the fear that ran through certain East Coast business circles. He stood there watching Riven the way someone watches a locked door suddenly open on its own. Not afraid, just recalibrating. That evening, without warning, a house attendant knocked on Riven's staff quarters door and told him to come to the private study. Mr. Dreven was waiting. The study was bigger than Riven's entire childhood home. Dark shelves, low lighting, the kind of quiet that doesn't happen by accident. It gets built layer by layer with thick walls and expensive windows and the deliberate removal of anything that makes noise. Caius was standing near the far window when Riven entered. He didn't turn around immediately. He let the silence work for a few seconds before he spoke. Sit. Riven sat. Caius turned then. He moved to the desk and stood behind it rather than sitting, which told Riven something about how this man thought about space. He wasn't settling in. He was evaluating. You've been here 11 hours, Caius said. Yes. And in those 11 hours you managed to do something 6 certified animal behaviorists, 3 trainers, and 2 veterinary specialists have failed to do in 2 years. He paused. Explain that. Riven kept his hands in his lap. I'm not sure there's much to explain. Try. He wasn't angry. Riven glanced briefly at the window, then back. Titan. When he charged, he wasn't attacking. He was testing. There's a difference in how they move, what they do with their shoulders, whether they're looking at you or through you. A beat. He was looking at me. Caius was quiet for a moment. You've worked with dogs before. I grew up around them. Riven didn't offer more than that. Not yet. Caius studied him the way someone reads a document they weren't expecting. Carefully. A little suspicious of their own interest. He changed 2 years ago, Caius said finally, and it was the first thing he'd said that didn't sound like a question or a command. It sounded close to something personal. Before that, he was fine. Good temperament. Trained well. Then something happened and he stopped tolerating anyone. He looked at the window again. Nobody has been able to tell me why. Riven didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about the way Titan had pressed his head against his chest. The weight of it. The desperation in something that big going that still. Something scared him, Riven said. Caius looked at him. Not a person. Not a command. Something that happened to him that he didn't understand and couldn't stop. Riven held the man's gaze for the first time. He's been protecting himself ever since. The silence stretched. Then Caius moved to the chair behind the desk, sat down, and opened a drawer. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a revised employment contract. Riven looked at the salary line and kept his expression neutral, which took more effort than he expected. New position, Caius said. Primary handler for Titan. Full access to the East Wing kennel, the grounds, the garden route. Your current duties transfer to another hire. He clasped his hands on the desk. You'll report directly to me on Titan status. Before Riven could respond, a knock at the study door. Helen Boateng, the house manager, opened the door just far enough to lean through. She was a tall woman in her late 50s with the posture of someone who had been managing complicated households for a very long time. Her expression said she had a message and wasn't thrilled about delivering it. The East Wing camera feed cut out again, she said. She looked at Caius, then very briefly at Riven. 3rd time in 6 weeks. Caius's jaw moved slightly. Have Marcus look at it. Marcus hasn't been able to locate the source. Another pause. Something moved through Caius's face and was gone. Handle it, he said. Helen nodded and pulled the door closed. Riven signed the contract. He didn't find out until later that night. Long after he'd returned to his quarters and Titan had quietly positioned himself outside the door. That earlier that evening, in the corridor outside the East Wing conference room, Titan had lunged without warning at a senior executive walking past. Not any executive. Varric Sloan. The dog had to be pulled back by 2 handlers. He hadn't broken skin, but he'd wanted to, and nobody seemed to want to talk about why. It wasn't random. That was the thing Riven noticed first, and kept noticing, day after day, as he moved through the rhythms of the estate with Titan beside him. The dog was selective. Deliberately, precisely selective. Housekeeping staff, kitchen workers, groundskeepers, drivers. Titan moved past them without tension. Some he ignored entirely. A few he even tolerated at close range, which the rest of the staff treated like a miracle every time it happened. But certain people triggered something immediate in him. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low stillness, a shift in posture, a tightening behind the shoulders, a fixed and unblinking focus. that Riven had learned to read before it escalated. It happened near Varric Sloan twice in 1 week. It happened near a financial manager named Brixton Okafor on a Tuesday morning in the East Corridor. It happened near a third man, younger, quieter, someone Riven didn't yet have a name for, outside the server room on a Thursday afternoon. Riven started keeping a mental log. He didn't write it down. Not yet. Writing things down felt premature, and besides, there was nothing concrete enough to put on paper. Just a dog's behavior and his own pattern recognition, which wasn't evidence of anything. He mentioned it once to Caius, carefully, framed as an observation rather than a theory. Caius had been reviewing documents at the garden table, a place he'd started working from more often since Titan began following Riven on the grounds. He didn't look up immediately. Titan has always had preferences, he said. This is different from preferences. Riven kept his tone even. He doesn't react to strangers the same way. It's specific people. People he already knows. Caius set down his pen. He looked at Titan, who was lying flat in the sun beside the stone bench, head resting on his paws. You think he's identifying something? I think he noticed something a long time ago, Riven said. And he hasn't forgotten it. Caius looked at him for a moment. Said nothing, then picked his pen back up. He didn't dismiss it, but he didn't confirm it either. He filed it away somewhere behind those pale, careful eyes and moved on. That evening, after Riven returned to the East Wing to check the kennel logs, he noticed something off near the security station. The monitor showing the North Corridor feed was dark, not glitching dark, like it had been turned off from somewhere else. He asked the overnight guard, a man named Terrell, what happened to the feed. Terrell looked at the monitor, looked back at Riven and said he had no idea. Then he changed the subject. Riven stood in the corridor for a moment after Terrell walked away. He'd passed the executive lounge on his way back from the grounds. The door had been cracked open. Voices had been low, deliberately low, and he hadn't caught full sentences. Just fragments. Moving the numbers by end of month. If anyone runs the full audit, Driven doesn't check that account directly. Then a door had clicked further down the hall, and the voices stopped. Riven had kept walking. Now he stood in the dark corridor next to a security monitor that someone had switched off and a guard who suddenly had nothing to say. Titan pressed his head against Riven's hip. The dog's ears were forward, alert, like he was listening for something Riven hadn't heard yet. Nobody talks about how loneliness moves. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in through the edges, through the small moments that should be easy and aren't, through the spaces in a day that stay quiet when they shouldn't. Riven had been living inside that kind of quiet for a long time before the estate. So had Caius, apparently. Neither of them said that out loud. But Titan had a way of making things visible that people worked hard to keep hidden. The morning walk started first. Practical, because the East Garden route was part of Titan's new routine and Caius had taken to being awake early in a way that had the staff quietly concerned. He'd begun appearing in the garden around 6 in the morning with a coffee he didn't finish, and the first time he crossed paths with Riven and Titan at the East Fountain, he'd simply fallen into step beside them without explanation. Nobody asked him about it. Nobody asked Riven about it either. They just walked. 3 figures moving through the morning light between the rose beds and the old iron gate at the property's edge. Titan between them, tail moving in low, easy arcs, the most relaxed anyone on the estate had ever seen him. Caius didn't fill silence the way most powerful men did. He didn't talk to hear himself. He spoke when he had something to say and he stopped when he didn't, and Riven found that unexpectedly comfortable. Most people in his life had required constant management. Constant calibration. Caius just walked. By the second week, the walks had shifted. Longer routes. Later in the morning. Sometimes afternoon. When the light turned amber over the stone paths and Titan would stop at random intervals to press his nose into the grass before moving again. The training sessions helped build a different kind of language. Riven worked with Titan in the West Yard every other day, basic obedience not to control him but to give him a structure he could trust. A reliable sequence. Sit, stay, come, release. The same commands in the same voice, the same tone, the same patience every time. Caius watched from the corner of the yard more often than not, leaning against the fence with his coffee, not interfering, just observing. Once, Riven caught him smiling. Just briefly. Gone almost before it registered. But it was there. The late-night conversations didn't start intentionally. They happened because Titan refused to settle in the kennel once the weather warmed, and Caius had authorized him to sleep in the East Wing corridor, which meant Riven was often up late on the bench outside the hall checking that the dog was settled. One night, Caius came down the corridor at 11:30 with a glass of water and no explanation for why he was still awake. He sat on the opposite end of the bench. Titan rearranged himself to rest half on each of their feet. "You grew up in Montana," Caius said. Not a question. He'd clearly read Riven's file. "Outside it," Riven said. "Small place. We had land. Rescue dogs. My uncle ran a shelter." Riven looked at the sleeping dog across their feet. "Mostly animals that had been abandoned or mistreated. Some of them came to us so shut down they wouldn't eat for the first week." He paused. "It takes time. That's the only real thing I know about it. You just have to stay." Caius was quiet for a moment. "Most people don't stay," he said. It wasn't entirely about the dogs. Riven knew that. He didn't say anything. But Titan's breathing between them was slow and even, and the silence that followed wasn't the kind that needed filling. Then, at 7:45 the next morning, before Riven had even made it to the garden, shouting broke out near the estate's east entrance. Glass breaking. Car alarm. Titan shot off his feet before Riven was fully upright. By the time they reached the entrance courtyard, the scene was already frozen. 3 guards, 2 housekeeping staff, and Helen Boateng standing in a wide arc around the wreckage of what had been moments ago, a polished black luxury sedan. The driver's side mirror was on the ground. The hood had a dent that hadn't been there on arrival. And Titan stood between the vehicle and its passenger, muscles locked, teeth showing, the deepest and quietest growl working through his chest like something mechanical. The passenger was straightening his jacket, adjusting his cufflinks, looking at the dog with an expression so controlled it almost looked bored. Varric Sloan. And for just a moment, under all that composure, something moved through his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. Like a man who had always known this moment was coming and had simply been waiting to see when it would arrive. The dent in the hood was still cooling when Caius stepped into the courtyard. He didn't rush. He never rushed. But the way he crossed the stone yard, measured, deliberate, without looking at anyone except Varric, told Riven everything about what this moment actually was. Varric Sloan adjusted his cufflink one more time and smiled. "The dog," he said, gesturing toward Titan like you gesture toward a minor inconvenience. "Again. Again," Caius said, flat, no question mark. Titan hadn't moved, still between Varric and the car, still vibrating with that low, locked-in focus that Riven now recognized as the dog's version of certainty. Not rage. Certainty. Titan wasn't confused about what he was reacting to. He never was.
Helen pulled Riven aside while security managed the distance between Varric and the dog. "That's the 4th incident involving him specifically," she said quietly, her voice barely above the ambient noise of the courtyard. 3 in 6 weeks. "I know," Riven said. She looked at him carefully. The security team pulled the East Corridor footage from the night of the 2nd incident. The night Marcus said the feed cut out. She paused. The footage wasn't corrupted. It was deleted. Manually. Riven went still. Helen's eyes moved to Varric, then back. Someone with system access. And not many people on this estate have that. She walked away before he could respond. That afternoon, Riven pulled the kennel logs from the past 2 years. Not the official summary, the raw entry logs, time-stamped and detailed. He cross-referenced the dates of Titan's most severe behavioral incidents against the estate's visitor and staff movement records. The pattern was exact. Every major incident aligned with a specific window of activity. Financial reporting periods, wire transfer authorizations, and one 3-day stretch where $14 million had quietly moved between company accounts. Riven stared at those numbers for a long time. Titan hadn't been reacting to people out of fear for himself. He'd been reacting to what those people were doing. That night, when Riven returned to his quarters, the door was already open. He hadn't left it open. On the bed, a single folded note. Plain paper. For words written in clean, unhurried handwriting. "Stop asking questions." Riven stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he picked up the note, folded it once more, and put it in his pocket. 3 things happened in the following 48 hours. First, Varric Sloan requested a private dinner meeting with Caius and arrived with 2 men Riven had never seen on the estate before. They moved like people who were paid not to be noticed. Nobody asked who they were. Second, the security system in the East Wing went down for 6 hours on a Tuesday night. Terrell, the overnight guard, reported it as a technical fault. The repair technician who came the next morning couldn't find the source of the problem. He left without fixing it. Third, Caius became protective in a way that wasn't announced. It was in the details. A guard newly assigned to the East Corridor. A change in Riven's scheduled routes that kept him inside the main estate grounds rather than the outer property. A conversation Riven overheard through the study door where Caius told someone named Desmond to run a full audit of every account that had moved funds in the last 26 months. The relationship between them had shifted without either of them naming it. Riven noticed it in the way Caius positioned himself during the morning walks now, closer. On the side that faced the estate's outer wall. Between Riven and the gate. Small things. Deliberate things. On the 3rd day, Riven laid out everything he had. Not dramatically. He requested a meeting, sat across from Caius at the garden table, and placed 3 documents in front of him. The kennel logs. The time-stamped movement records. A printed summary of the financial windows he'd identified. Caius read through all of it without speaking. He read it twice. "You built this from the kennel logs," he said. "And the access records Helen gave me." Caius looked up. Something moved through his face, not surprise exactly. More like a man watching a wall he'd trusted suddenly show a crack that had been there all along. "Varric has been with this company for 11 years, he said. Riven didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Caius picked up the summary page and looked at it for a long moment. "I'll need the full audit to confirm this." "I know. It's going to take time." "I know that too." Caius set the page down. He looked at Titan, who was lying flat under the garden table with his chin on Riven's shoe. "In the meantime," Caius said quietly, "be careful." Riven nodded. That night, someone accessed the security system again. This time they got further: the East Wing feed, the main gate cameras, the corridor outside Riven's quarters. And this time, when Riven woke up at 2 in the morning to Titan barking at the door, he wasn't there. The room was empty. His phone was on the nightstand. His jacket was on the chair. Riven Hale was gone. Titan destroyed 2 doors. That was the first thing on the incident report, the cold, clinical language of a security log trying to describe something it had no category for. The dog had broken through the East Wing interior door and then the exterior service door at the back of the main building. Both reinforced. Both now off their frames. He refused food for 36 hours. He wouldn't enter the kennel. Wouldn't settle. Moved through the estate in a circuit East Wing courtyard service entrance, back to East Wing over and over with a focused, grinding energy that wore down everyone who tried to manage him. Caius launched the search within 20 minutes of the disappearance being confirmed. He called Desmond first. Then his head of private security, a man named Raffle, who arrived at the estate at 4 in the morning with a team and set up a command area in the main hall. Caius stood in the center of it with his sleeves rolled up and his expression completely closed. Not calm, not panicked, just sealed shut in the way people get when they cannot afford to feel something until they're done. He pulled every camera feed from the 6-hour window when the system had been down. The gaps were surgical. Exactly the right moments missing. Exactly the right corridors dark. That told him everything about who was responsible. But knowing and proving are different things. And finding Riven was more urgent than either. By the 2nd day, the staff moved quietly around the estate. Fewer conversations. Fewer people making eye contact. Helen ran the household operations with the kind of efficient silence that meant she was holding herself together through routine. DeMarco, who had grabbed Riven's arm on his first day and warned him about the dog, stood at the service gate for most of the afternoon without being asked to. People respond to the absence of someone even when they don't have words for it. Caius sat in the study at midnight on the second night and didn't open a single document. He just sat. Titan eventually came and lay down at the study door, just outside it, like he was keeping watch on the room the way he used to keep watch on Riven's corridor. The anonymous call came through on the estate's main line at 2:47 in the morning. Male voice. No identification. 11 words total. The property on Selden Road. East Side. Don't bring police. Then the line went dead. Caius looked at Raffle. Raffle looked at the map on the table. That's 40 minutes from here, he said. And it's Verek's family property. Caius was already standing. Here's where it gets complicated, because a tip with no name attached, pointing to an isolated location, arriving in the middle of the night, could be a rescue. Or it could be exactly the kind of trap that ends both the search and the searcher. Caius knew that. He went anyway. The property on Selden Road had been empty for 2 years. No lights, no cars in the front drive. Just a long gravel road cutting through overgrown land, and a building at the end of it that hadn't been maintained since the family stopped using it. Raffle's team moved in from 3 sides. Caius was told to stay at the perimeter vehicle. He lasted 4 minutes before he moved. Titan was with him, because nobody had been able to leave Titan anywhere since Riven disappeared, and the dog had gotten into the SUV before anyone thought to stop him. Now he moved alongside Caius through the dark grass at the property's edge, quiet in a way that wasn't natural for a dog his size. He knew something. The building's east side had a ground floor window with the lock forced. Recent. Within the last few hours. Titan found it first. He stopped at that window and went completely still. The same stillness from the courtyard, the same locked focus, and then he made that sound. The broken exhale. The one nobody else had heard him make before the day Riven knelt on the stone. Raffle's team was already inside. Caius went through the window. The room was empty. Storage shelving, dust, 2 folding chairs. A door on the far wall. He crossed the room and pushed it open and then stopped. Riven was sitting against the far wall with his hands bound in front of him, and a cut above his left eye that had stopped bleeding but was still dark and swollen. He was awake, alert, looking at the door with the kind of careful, measured attention that said he had been managing his own fear for long enough that it had started to look like calm. He looked at Caius, then down at Titan, who crossed the room in 4 strides and pressed his entire body against Riven's side. "Hey!" Riven said softly to the dog. That was all. Raffle's team located Varek Sloan and the 2 men who'd arrived with him at the estate 3 days prior. 2 of them were found on the property's north side. Varek himself had made it to a car parked on the road behind the tree line, but not far enough. He was stopped before he reached the main road. What followed moved fast. Desmond's full audit had been running since Caius authorized it 6 days earlier. By the time the local authorities were brought in, not before and not by accident, the financial documentation was complete enough to make the case clear. Varek had been routing funds through a network of shell accounts for over 2 years. The total came to just under $19 million. 3 senior executives were connected to the structure. All 3 had been on Titan's list. Pause on that. The dog had been right about every single one of them. Caius gave a full statement. He didn't minimize the organization's exposure. He didn't route the disclosure through legal to soften the language. He put the information in front of the relevant authorities directly and completely, which cost him a significant amount of short-term political capital inside his own industry. He chose it anyway. After everything was handled, after the statements, the documentation, the calls, the controlled chaos of a major fraud disclosure moving through professional channels, Caius sat outside the main estate building for the first time in 4 days and didn't move for a long time. The next morning, there was still one thing he hadn't said. He didn't say it that night either, but he called for a public gathering the following afternoon. Estate staff, key personnel, the people who had kept the house running through everything that had just happened. He had something to tell them. The garden was full in a way it hadn't been before. Staff who usually worked in separate wings stood together on the stone paths between the rose beds. Helen stood near the east gate with her hands folded. DeMarco was near the fountain. Terrell, who had been formally removed from his security position pending review, was not there. Riven stood to the side, near the bench where he and Caius had spent those late nights while Titans slept across their feet. He had a bandage over the cut above his eye. He'd tried to stand further back in the second row, where he'd spent most of his time on this estate. Helen had moved him to the front without comment. Caius stood at the top of the stone steps. He didn't use notes. "Most of you know what happened," he said. His voice carried easily in the open air, and he spoke the way he always did. No extra words, no performance. A network of people inside this organization stole from it. They used their access, their positions, and what I gave them, which was trust, to do it. He paused. And they nearly hurt someone who should have been safe here. He looked at Riven directly. "That's on me," he said. "The audit should have run sooner. The pattern was there. Someone saw it before I did. A shift in the garden. Quiet. Riven Hale came here 11 weeks ago as a house employee. He took a position that nobody else wanted, working with an animal nobody else could manage. And in those 11 weeks, he identified a financial fraud that 11 years of internal controls missed." He stopped. Let that land. Not because he was looking for it. Because he was paying attention. Because he cared enough about what was happening in front of him to actually look. Titan was lying on the stone at the bottom of the steps. Quiet. Head up. Watching Caius the way he watched Riven, with that attentive, unhurried focus. "The organization is going to be restructured," Caius continued. "Some positions will change. Some responsibilities will shift. What won't change is the standard." He looked across the gathered faces. "If you work here, you will be treated with respect. And I expect the same in return." He descended the steps. The gathering moved the way gatherings do when someone has said something that actually lands. Slowly, in small groups, people finding each other. Helen touched Riven's arm briefly as she passed. DeMarco gave him a nod that said more than most people say in a full conversation. Riven watched them move and felt something he hadn't expected. Not relief, not pride, something quieter. Like a space inside him that had been braced for a very long time finally releasing. He was still standing near the bench when Caius crossed the garden toward him. The crowd had thinned. The afternoon light was sitting low and amber across the stone paths, the same light that had settled over their morning walks for the past 2 months. Caius stopped in front of him. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Titan, who had moved to sit beside Riven's left knee. "You're not invisible," Caius said. Simple. Direct. Like most of the things he said that actually mattered. Riven looked at him. "You never were," Caius said. "I just needed to say that." Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Titan let out a slow breath, circled once, and lay down across both their feet. It was such a precise, deliberate act that Riven almost laughed. Almost. He didn't. But the feeling was close enough to warmth that it didn't matter. They stood there in the garden while the afternoon moved around them. The fountain running, the light shifting, the sound of the staff returning to their routines. Later, Long after the guests and the officials and the restructuring conversations, Riven sat on the garden bench with Titan's head in his lap. Just that. The garden was empty. The estate was quiet in the way it only got after something large had moved through it and left the air changed. Riven ran his hand across the back of Titan's neck. The dog was still, breathing slow. Everyone had been so afraid of him, and all this time he had just been waiting for someone to stay. Everyone thought the most dangerous creature in the mansion was the dog. They were wrong. The most powerful force there had always been kindness. But neither of them knew that a visitor arriving at the estate the following week would change everything again. If the story moved you, if Riven's quiet courage, Titan's loyalty, or Caius's choice to put truth above comfort made you feel something, drop a comment below and tell us which moment stayed with you the most. This channel exists to tell stories about the people no one notices, the ones who show up quietly and change everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Every story we share is a chance to be reminded of what actually matters. And if someone in your life needs to hear a story like this today, share it with them. We'll see you in the next chapter.